Welcome, everyone. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of Mercy One Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Welcome to our weekly cancer education series. It's brought to you in part by a grant from the Iowa Oncology Society. And our topic tonight is running. And actually, to be more specific, it's the spirituality of running. And our guest is Dr. Bill Koenig. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So Bill is a physical medicine and rehabilitation specialist, retired, and an avid runner, and also a cancer survivor. And we're going to kind of talk about all those things and how they come together. He's also the author of this book that was just published last year called The Spirituality of Running. It is a gorgeous book. It's filled with words of wisdom from Bill, words of wisdom from philosophers, from Nietzsche to Charlie Brown. And it's also filled with just gorgeous photography by Randy Schwager. And it's called The Spirituality of Running. And you can get that book at www.lulu.com. And I just am blown away by the beauty of this book and also the spirituality of it. But before we talk about running or cancer or spirituality, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Springfield, Ohio, which is about 80,000 people at the time that I was there. And I graduated from high school in 1963. And I, despite my size, tried to be a three-sport athlete. And so I've always been a runner in one form or another.
How big was your high school class?
The high school class was 602 people.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Huge school. So competing in sports in a school that big is difficult.
I strove hard to be a bench warmer.
Yes. So but you did run like track or cross country? Was that something you did in high school?
And,
I mean, the other sports that you ran in, but you actually did participate in, like, because I imagine, knowing your size now, you were never a big person.
No.
So in terms of competitive high school sports for a guy, that kind of leaves you with running and maybe wrestling.
Well, in this case, I did play baseball and I played varsity basketball and then cross country.
Oh, wow.
And some of the athletes I did compete against were quite good. A couple went to the NBA and the NFL. I mean, I didn't play football, but I played against guys who were good enough athletes. So anyway, I did compete, but was not a star by any means.
So as a child, as an adolescent, as a high school, when did you get an appreciation for running? I can tell you I did a little bit of having to run because I played football, but I never in high school would tell you that I experienced joy from running. Did you at that age, did you have this connection with running being joyful?
Absolutely. In the very first part of the book I described, and it was, I just came right out of my head. The first thing I could do is get out the door, and it was like 3 blocks down the street to where the big public park was, and I ran, and I would run even, when you didn't have to. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was always something that I wanted to do. And I, of course, have heard a lot of people say, they want to be athletes. They are very good athletes, far better than I was, who hated to run.
Right.
I remember this one guy. One guy who was one of the best basketball players. And the coach also said, if you can't run a mile in under 8 minutes, you're not going to be on the varsity. And it was like pulling teeth for him to, to do that. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
But for me, it was sort of a natural thing. And we laughed, Kathy and I, looking through stuff. My mother saved everything when I was a child. And my first grade report card said, won't sit still. Also said won't stop talking, but that's another issue.
So from high school on to college, where'd you go to college?
Went to Ohio State.
And what was your first major when you first went to Ohio State?
I just declared pre-med, and then you had your choice of about 5 or 6 different degrees you could take, everything from chemistry to anatomy, physiology, and I got my degree in pathogenic microbiology.
Gotcha. But you knew from the very beginning of starting college that you wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
Were there doctors in your family?
No.
Okay.
No, my dad was an engineer, and he was very proud of his little company, and he would always say, if this business is open to you, and then later on it was, if you don't want to take over this perfectly good business, I won't influence you, but just as long as you don't become a damn doctor.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, so that was the encouragement you got from Dad.
Pardon my French there, but he did not care for doctors. My mother was an RN, and she thought that would be a great thing to do.
Oh, okay. So I was flabbergasted by how big your high school class was. Most of us don't even have any idea how many people are in our class at a school like Ohio State. But were you able to compete in college sports athletics?
Not at Ohio State, but actually my first year of college was in my hometown, a Division III school called Wittenberg.
Okay.
And so my thought at the time was I'll either be a doctor or a college basketball coach. And I know I will never play, but maybe I could be the 15th guy and sit on the bench and then do that. So that was my plan. The problem was Wittenberg was the defending national champion. Okay. And so I was cut the first day.
Oh.
So,
but did you get to do cross country and track, or did
no, not in college. Just
okay.
And
so at Ohio State, obviously a pre-med at a university like that, pretty competitive, lots of studying. Did you run recreationally on a regular basis in college?
Not on a regular basis, but to relieve stress.
Gotcha.
And I also always had difficulty until maybe 30s or 40s being a little ADHD. I'm not sure I was ever diagnosed with that, but my birth history was I was a footling breech born in 1945 before there were cesarean sections. So I was very depressed at birth. And I think I had some upper motor neuron tone still even until I was 7 or 8 years of age. And I know I'm too technical there, but the point is it was sort of I did not have a good birth history. And so when I would study, I would have to squeeze rubber balls. I got a musician's music stand to stand on, and I would run in place while I was studying. And so periodically I would take breaks. And then when I got to be a senior, some of the other people who were also in pre-med would go with me. We'd run at 10 o'clock at night in the dark and go around the Ohio State campus and then take that as a study break and then just keep studying until, midnight, 1 o'clock.
And of course, as you said, you were born in 1945. So as you were going through high school and college and medical school, it wasn't like there were lots of people who went out running recreationally. The running boom had not hit. So you were a bit ahead of that. So it was probably unusual to be out there saying, I'm running just to have fun and find joy. It's like,
the campus police wondered what we were doing.
Don't you know where the beer store is? I mean, so then from Ohio State, where did you go to medical school?
I also went to Ohio State for that. And I took a residency to start in pediatrics and then decided I did not want to be a pediatrician. And so then I took another residency, and that's the one you alluded to in physical medicine and rehabilitation.
Yes. So your specialty is pretty unusual. I would say most lay people have never heard of PM&R or physiatry as a specialty. So tell us a little bit about what is physical medicine and rehabilitation. What is that specialty all about?
Well, it's it overlaps many specialties. It overlaps orthopedic surgery, except we do not do any surgery. It overlaps neurology a little bit. It overlaps rheumatology. So we are concerned with the musculoskeletal system and the neurologic system and diseases that affect that. And a subpart of the specialty is rehabilitation medicine. So we take care of people who've had strokes and spinal cord injuries and head injuries and neuromuscular diseases and supervise their rehabilitation, take care of their, we sort of function as a general practitioner for a specific group, i.e., people who are disabled. So
Mhm.
we may also follow them for years after their initial rehabilitation. The other part of the specialty often involves electrodiagnostic medicine, where we try to figure out why people have weakness, numbness, uh, other symptoms, and then with electrical testing, make a diagnosis.
Right. The
So
EMGs and the
EMG and nerve,
NCVs,
yes,
the different testing to try to determine,
yeah,
where is the pathology? Does it have to do with the muscles or the nerves or the,
exactly right.
right. And then obviously, as you've already mentioned, you uh, do actual treatments on
Yes,
patients and you oversee physical therapy departments and
yes,
help design rehabilitation regimens for patients, whether they've had knee surgery or they've got a spinal cord injury.
exactly right. And prescribe medications or when appropriate, and sometimes have them see an orthopedist, sometimes not necessarily for surgery, but say you think a certain area would profit from an injection. Well, you better have somebody who knows the anatomy perfectly.
So it
So,
seems to me
yeah.
obvious now, but I'm curious whether it was obvious to you at the time you chose that specialty. The relationship between running as a physical activity, I mean, all about anatomy and physiology, and your profession, which is really very much about anatomy and physiology and function.
Exactly right. And that's what we would try to stress to the patients who would many be depressed about what they had lost. We try to emphasize what you have left, what we can do to maximize uh, your potential, and the role of the exercises that are prescribed that are classic. Something that I also did was that for I don't care what their diagnosis was, and I had some very helpful physical therapists who bought this, we would make them aerobically fit as possible. So they would not necessarily have all of their therapy doing, say, Delorme's exercises or the Oxford technique or something that a physiatrist would write specifically for this diagnosis. But we would also have them on stationary bikes or where therapeutic pools were available, swimming, that sort of thing. So at the time, I didn't know what I was doing or
Mhm.
why it would work. And
Mhm.
then we've learned that there's such a thing exercise gives us called brain derived neurotropic factor. And I think that's what was operative. And
And is that what you call endorphins?
no, that's different. It's different. And endorphins, I think, would help uh, with the depression that
Okay.
so very few people had to go. I
But
was
tell me
amazed.
again, what was the
It's a molecule that's derived. Actually, the brain produces it in response to aerobic exercise, and then it tells itself to regenerate. And I think it also, I haven't read the physiology lately of that, but it perhaps also helps with the peripheral, the
gotcha?
nerve
So even though
system.
it's aerobic activity that stimulates it, the end result of it is to help with structural
Yes,
muscles,
yes.
tendons, bones. It can help with a
And I
healing process.
And I think that helped a lot of our rehabilitation
Gotcha.
patients. And we had a couple of patients at Yonker Rehab that achieved levels of function that were beyond textbook expectations. And they were mostly young
Hmm.
men, and they were willing to do it. And then several of them had been former athletes before they were injured.
Right.
And I think that exercise was
Gotcha. So we're not just going to build that muscle up and work on flexibility. We want to get you aerobically active, and that helps create some
And, and,
hormones that.
and we'll get into later, perhaps at your aegis, but I think that's also important in cancer recovery.
Definitely. So let's, before we start talking about running, and that is the topic, perhaps share a little bit about your own cancer journey. And then we're going to connect all of this together with this concept of the spirituality of running. But if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your own cancer journey.
Not at all. It had been my plan to have an indefinite period of working. I wasn't sure exactly when I would retire. And in August of 2014, I was quite surprised after I had a biopsy done, a prostate biopsy, that the young urologist said, "I'm sorry to tell you, but you have cancer and you're going to need surgery probably pretty soon." And the reason that I was kind of shocked about that was I had had a prior elevation of PSA after hernia surgery. It went from 1 to 10, and I was biopsied then, and went, negative and went down. So here, years later, I'd assumed it was something else causing the problem. So he tells me, "Do you have cancer?" And, at first it's like someone punches you in the gut. It just knocks the wind right out of you emotionally, and you don't know what to think. And then also, he says you will probably need surgery fairly quickly. And then you go home with that, and you think, first, what did I do wrong? Why did this occur? And then you start second guessing so many things about your lifestyle, what you've done, and then you reach a place where you say, well, maybe this isn't wrong, maybe this is wrong, maybe this guy is wrong, maybe I need a second opinion, and that sort of thing. And then reality starts to take over, and you realize you do have this diagnosis, and then you think, okay, what can I do about it? And you start exploring options. And that's when I first learned about active surveillance for prostate cancer. But the urologist wanted my best interest, and he said, I can cure you. I have a 95% probability I can cure you with surgery. But I also asked him about his side effect rates, and he was quite optimistic that there would be no incontinence, no lack of sexual function, and so on and so forth. And then you read the literature, and it's not quite so optimistic. Then you start talking to some people who have had the surgery or the radiation treatment, and they talk about the side effects that they have experienced. And so then you start saying, well, maybe this active surveillance, there's something to it. And so you make a bargain with the urologist that you'll have another biopsy a year out. And then depending on what that shows, you'll have the surgery or not, or explore radiation more. And so that's sort of what I did. And I also, at the time, learned that I could resubmit the biopsy specimen for genomic testing. And that gave further information, too, because the biopsy will, of course, tell you by Gleason scores what a rough probability of your prognosis might be. It's not accurate 100%. But the genomic score was favorable. So I kind of went with that for a while. Well, I went through a couple of urologists, and the numbers kept getting worse up and down with the PSAs. The second biopsy was not worse. Actually, it was a little bit more favorable. Could be, sampling error, of course, but it gave me, hope that, well, maybe I. Meanwhile, I kept thinking, what else? What do I know about prostate cancer? And think back 75 years ago when they didn't know how to do the operation, they did rectal diathermy on patients for
Which
prostate
was
cancer.
heating the prostate.
They heated the prostate
Mm-hmm.
with rectal diathermy. And so I thought, okay, I've never stopped running. Maybe I'll just keep running more. Maybe that local heat will do something. And then, of course, there's a lot of systemic effect of exercise. We won't go into that in great detail, but it's been pretty well documented in the medical literature that aerobic exercise helps a number of cancers.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it just in terms of helping, it's the closest thing we have to the fountain of youth is, regular exercise, both aerobic and resistance training, in terms of helping us be as healthy as possible for as long as possible. It doesn't actually prevent death, though, but
Well,
and we're fortunate as a species that that's the case. But back to your active surveillance. So it is so true that for many men, maybe even up to 80% of men with prostate cancer, active surveillance is an acceptable option for managing prostate cancer that is localized to the prostate. So if the cancer hasn't spread from the prostate, options include, depending on, PSA and Gleason score and genomic, uh, surgery or radiation or active surveillance. And in fact, last year in the New England Journal, they reported on a study that took 1,600 men from Great Britain that were diagnosed with organ-confined prostate cancer and randomly assigned, the patient and the doctor didn't get to choose the treatment. A third had active surveillance, a third had surgery, a third had radiation. They followed the men for 15 years. At the end of 15 years, no difference in survival between the group that had active surveillance, surgery, or radiation. And each of the group, about 2.5% of the men had died of prostate cancer, but it was the same regardless of treatment. So 97.5% of the men were alive after 15 years, regardless of whether they had active surveillance or radiation or surgery. So when you were diagnosed with prostate cancer, how old were you?
let's see, I was 68 and a half,
Okay. And how old are you now?
almost 79.
Okay. So we're 11 years in with active surveillance and no evidence of the cancer having spread. And I can verify, yep, you are alive. Yes.
And I can also verify that part of my uh, going with this is due to Dr. Richard Deming, because you keep turning this over in your head about, should I stop the active surveillance? Because a lot of men drop out with it. They get scares for various reasons. And I started thinking, my father died of pancreatic cancer. He had prostate cancer also. My mother died of lung cancer. My younger sister died of lung cancer. So I may not have the best genes to be fighting this. Meanwhile, my PSAs keep going up. They are record high. Uh, my urologist never saw one that high that hadn't metastasized. So you keep thinking, okay, maybe I really should be doing something about this. So I went to you about 2.5 years in, and you gave me a thorough examination, record, looked at all that stuff, and recommended continuing with the active surveillance. And for that, I thank you.
Well, and it's not like active surveillance is better than surgery or radiation, but it certainly has fewer side effects. But it does take someone who philosophically understands that having cancer cells in your body is not the same thing as dying of cancer.
Yes.
And so being of many individuals, many men wouldn't consider active surveillance because they've just been told they've had cancer. It's a gut punch, and the easiest thing is, do you have an opening tomorrow to do surgery? Let's just get it over and done with. Um, let's shift a little bit and talk now about running. And I'm particularly interested, how did you come up with the title, The Spirituality of Running? So I gather that your running has not been about winning gold medals and amassing the biggest collection of T-shirts and participation medals, but has been something much different in terms of why you run.
I got to that point, and the reason this book exists is because I did deviate from that, but my ego was guilty of some of the things you
Okay,
just said.
so maybe your early running careers, it was about how many marathons can
Absolutely.
I run, and
Can I break 3 hours? And
okay,
that's in that book.
okay.
And in fact, I was so ridiculously competitive. I used to brag that I never lost a 10K race to a woman.
I bet you have now.
Yes, I have. But
Yeah,
then,
no, I hear you. Yeah.
so that was one cutoff, and then
Maybe I only got fourth in my age group, but there was not a woman that passed me.
that's exactly
Uh-huh.
right. But then I will also add, I never beat the first place woman in a marathon. I never ever in the marathons I ran. Anyway, uh, but for a while I was also driven by the idea that I must uh, run a sub 3 hour marathon. And I shaved off almost half an hour and almost got to that point, but never could quite get there. And then, as I point out in the book, then as I got into more of the spiritual aspect, understanding what I was getting out of running, then that ego driven part left me. And I was able to, celebrate the fact that I am lucky, I'm fortunate to be able to go out and do this every day. And it gives me so much. It's an active meditation, it's treating my cancer, it's making me a better citizen.
And Bill, what would you say was the approximate age when that transition of running for ego to understanding that it was part of wellness and, if you will, joy and meaning and purpose?
I can't give you a specific date because it I would say the recognition of this change probably would be right about the time of the cancer diagnosis and thereafter. But there were periods of time before that where I would have brief moments where I could see more clearly how the spiritual part of me should be coming out and the ego diminishing. Um, so I would, I guess, say it that way.
So I'm thinking, so there was a time I ran every single day, and kind of one of those competitive, well, how many days in a row can I go without not running? And even if you were flying, you'd find a time to go out, and you had to at least run 1 mile to say that you had run that day. So I understand the ego, but I also remember when I started to experience what we just kind of loosely called the endorphins, this runner's high. And for me, it would never occur during the first half mile. It would always be after you got a half mile or 1 mile, and this was back, where I was running maybe at least 5 to 8 miles every day. But that sense of, while I was running, that I am feeling something that really feels good.
Yes, that's true.
So I remember that. And then I also remember going home, shower, because I was a morning runner, and then driving to work and being aware that I feel good. I have this sense of joy about me. And I would say I was probably 30 when I started feeling this dual feeling of just joy when I was running and this sense of joy that lasted throughout the day. Um, I don't know that I ever got into associating that with what you call spirituality. Maybe define for us a bit this sense of joy and its relationship to what you call spirituality.
I think that there are two parts, and I think that just the running that you described and so forth, I felt the same way on a daily basis, and I needed that, and I think it helped me uh, be a better physician and perhaps a better person all around, uh, just from the physical exercise and then things that have you well described. Uh, but then the other part that started to come to me was when I would be out in actual nature and away from
Mm,
city streets
mhm.
and so forth. And then I could start, I don't know, thinking about things differently, not feeling so committed to an actual solution or seeing everything as a problem, but just being more mellow. Um, and the reason this book came into existence is I was actually writing another book, and I am still, and it's about how to run for a lifetime. And what that book has arguments as to why we should run and how we should run and how to everything you can think of. It could be this thick if I don't pare it down, uh, but also a whole section on how to self-diagnose and self-treat. So
Like
very
running injuries, you mean?
running
Uh-huh.
injuries, everything. So it's got, well, and then all the benefits, cognitive benefits, psychological benefits. And so then I was writing a chapter on spiritual benefits. And I told my wife, Kathy, uh, I'm getting pretty wordy on this. I mean, I'm wordy to start with, as you can see, but I couldn't pare it down. And she said, "Why don't you kind of take a step aside and
Mhm.
do this?" And that's exactly what I did. And the more I wrote, then the more I started thinking about what I have gotten from shifting from city to running in nature.
Yes, I that resonates with me so much, because I've never been a treadmill runner at all, and regardless of, but the role that nature plays when you're running, and I was never one to think about the length of my stride and the cadence of my and where my arm position was. It was more like getting lost in nature. And as you're running through, um, various, I'm trying to find a beautiful one of the parks here, and feeling one with nature as you're running along. I always here in Des Moines for the last 35 years, my favorite is the trails right along the river. So you're
Yes,
seeing the eagles and the ducks and the geese, and
exactly.
you're seeing, the foxes and the deer and everything along the way, and owls, and getting feeling as you're running this cadence and the heartbeat and being part of nature.
Exactly. You stole one of my quotes indirectly. I feel that I am not observing nature. I am part of nature. And the more you pay attention to running in nature, then you start realizing that you're not just looking at a little panorama as you pass through, all of which are quite interesting and uplifting in their own way. But then you start saying, I'm going to appreciate more uh, that I've just been passing through. And then, as I say, sometimes if you go the other, run a different route or run backwards or whatever, or force yourself to stop and
Mhm.
just walk for a period of time. That's the other thing, that this book is not simply about running, it's about being in nature. And the photography, my words in the book and my ideas have some helpful content, I hope. But the pictures that Randy Schwager has taken that illustrate this book,
Yeah, they're just gorgeous.
sometimes, you just have to stop and be your own camera and look at look at what's ahead of you. And I think one of the first times that came to mind was when I was running in the winter and was stopped, and I thought, you know, these trees have no leaves on them and they're dark. And this is kind of an overcast day, but there is a beauty to that architecture
Mm.
that, if I hadn't stopped and looked at it, I wouldn't have seen it. And so the same thing is true that people can walk. I have a whole chapter here on walking in parks, because you can't always run. Sometimes various reasons you can't. And so if you're in a wheelchair, you're not a runner, but you can be in a wheelchair and you can go out and you can observe the same things, get the same feelings the runner's
Right.
getting from
The
nature.
healing power of
Yeah.
nature, and then obviously you get this healing power squared because of the physical activity you're doing within nature,
Well,
which I think
I like that. I'm going to steal that and
Okay,
put it
you
in the
can have
next
that.
book.
Yeah, it is. I mean, physiologically, you probably can get the same thing on a treadmill, but there's nothing to compare running in nature compared to running on a treadmill. You
Absolutely.
probably can, work on your time, work on your speed, work on your arm position and all of that. But it's hard to work on the spiritual feeling of being part of the universe running on a treadmill compared to running along the river and
Yeah.
witnessing the sky, the sun, the wind, the beauty of all of nature.
Yeah, there's no work, no feeling of work when you're running outdoors. But you put me on the indoor elliptical when it's below zero wind chill now, and there's ice all over the place, and it's painful to get an hour for me.
So this is written with several chapters, and I'm just going to throw out the chapters because each one is a little bit of a theme. So say something about the relationship of running with creativity.
When I sat down and started, expanding on all this, and would think about, you know, what what am I deriving from running in nature that I would not get if I was just going to work every day, and started thinking, what's a normal work day? No matter what we do, we have a set of stuff in front of us, problems to be solved, people to interact with, and so forth. And we just go, 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 go. And we don't do, sometimes we are creative, like a surgeon who encounters something difficult and figures out on his feet how to do something different and helps that patient. That's creativity. But most of us in our work days just don't really do much that's really creative. But I think we as humans really have an innate desire to be creative of various. And you just look at a 5-year-old who's finally just getting away from her parents a little bit, and she's interacting with a sibling, or she's interacting with toys, or whatever, and inventing these things. Our youngest granddaughter is a great example of that. And you can see this creative gene going to work and wanting to do that. Well, I think we have that too. And as adults, we just have it just suppressed. So, when you're out in nature, you start seeing how nature is creative, and you see all the different things that the animals and plants and the fir trees growing up out of little crevices, and how in the can be in the Sonoran Desert, as I described there, and you think, how could there be anything growing there? But there is. You think of the creativity of trees. I just love trees and what they do for us to make the planet survivable for us. So all that is creativity. And so, when you're out running in nature or walking in nature or whatever, then you start to be creative. You start looking at the picture in front of you and you see something different. Like there's a picture in there Randy has taken of this beautiful, uh, um, what do you call those? Sunflower. And
Yes.
I stopped once and looked at a sunflower. I never really looked at a sunflower that closely, and got closer and closer. And you could see this intricate geometric design. And then you appreciate that and you start thinking about other things in your life. And then you start getting ideas and things will pop into your head about, I was thinking about such and such a thing in my life, or something that's been suggested, and I put it out of my mind, and then now I can think of how that would be useful and how that could connect with something else. So
Do you think that the creativity is more related to nature than it is to the act of running?
I think that the act of running, probably of itself, clears you a little bit. It makes the endorphins we
Sometimes,
talked about, and
y-
both.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
then, you quiet the mind when you're out in that spiritual milieu that nature has, and I think that allows the background noise that we all seem to have. It tamps it down a little bit and allows for
One
that.
of your chapters is problem solving. And so I'm kind of thinking of creativity and problem solving. Sometimes when I run, I'm not always focusing on exactly every leaf and tree. I'm sometimes ruminating, hopefully in a positive way, on issues, and sometimes creative solutions to problems might come to me running. Is that something you
Yes.
experience? Is that?
Oh, absolutely. I would take difficult cases with me in my head sometimes. And the beauty of my specialty was we would follow up a lot with people similar to yours. And sometimes, you wouldn't think of it as a burden as much as thinking, how can I think of something better that may help this patient? And then, you know, you might put it out of your mind for a time and you see something here and you're going to look at this and feel the warmth or smell the earth or whatever, and then you start thinking about the problem, and you may have a creative solution for that. And as I mentioned, in the book here, I'm fairly my ego gets too much here, but I invented a test that I took 2 years. I read the literature. I could not find anybody anywhere who had a test for something called radial tunnel syndrome. And it got to be the point that after I had this pop into my head how to do it, and then I found an orthopedic hand surgeon who was willing to take my prognostications based upon this new test and operate or not operate, and then give me back feedback about it, that we sort of developed the test together in 1989. And I swear that just kind of popped into my head after a lot of thinking about it. So it was
But during
problem
a
solving,
run.
but it was during the run that it finally came to me how to do it.
So clearly a relationship there between, creativity and problem solving.
Yeah.
Two other chapters that seem like they may be related, and I'm interested in how running is related to gratitude and humility.
Well,
Kind of the opposite of ego, where we both started talking about, we might have started running about ego, but maybe the flip side is humility and the relationship between running and humility.
I use a phrase in there in one of the paragraphs. It said, I said, you first have to pass through gratitude before you arrive at humility. And kind of what this book summarizes what I think I'm doing is when I go out and I run in nature or walk in nature or just observe nature, I think I'm getting something that I can't define, but it's there. It it takes over. And what that does is it quiets my mind. And then what I do is a mental exercise that a lot of recovery programs do called a gratitude list. And they call it, the AA calls it the attitude of gratitude. And an example would be, you could just give thanks right then for what you see in front of you, the beauty of nature or whatever. But you can also just do it in a room. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and the thing in front of me was the clock radio. And I said, I was explaining to the person I was talking to on the phone. And you can look at that radio and you can say, okay, what gratitude can I think of that the radio does for me? And you think, okay, well, it entertains me. It gives me information. Does all the things. The clock radio tells me what time it is. And then you start thinking, I have to give gratitude toward whomever figured out AM radio waves and whoever figured out FM radio waves when they used to have good music on radio.
Little editorial comment there. But
And,
yes, so that's an experience, or not it's a task or a something that anybody can do anytime.
Yes, you do it exactly right. And so when you just go and you can just keep following down the line, the manufacturer who made the radio, I can't do that. You can put all the parts out here. I can't make that radio. And so anything we can think of. So you do the gratitude list, and that again quiets your mind. It puts you in a receptive mood, and then you do start having a feeling of humility, and not humiliation or not whatever negative connotation some people might put on that, but you just have that change in you, and that's sort of what I think that this whole book is about, and the process is doing those things. So there is a relationship between gratitude and humility.
It seems like it's a practice, just like going to church and kneeling and praying for an hour, or sitting in lotus position meditating, that getting outside and running becomes a spiritual practice. It gets you out of the mundane, into nature, opens things up, and it becomes a spiritual practice.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a very, very well said. It it may look that it's purely ego to go out and run every day and almost insist on being outdoors no matter what the weather is, but it's going to church. It's a church that is not made of bricks and mortar.
Yeah, and one of your chapters is sacred places, and that's obviously referring to nature.
Yes.
So it's hard. Your book and your practice of running is so inherently tied to nature that it's hard to separate the two as distinct, different practices.
That's exactly right.
So there is also, you shared with us your age, a chapter on aging. I bet you're not running as fast as you were at age 30. How do you project, and your age again right now is 78
and a half.
78 and a half. Where do you think your running will be at age 85?
I hope that I can still break stride a little bit, but I will be still pleased if I can just get outdoors and move and observe. And I had a thing, a medical thing not related to my cancer a year ago called paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia. And those attacks make your heart go about 200 beats a minute, and you faint and you get all that. And I saw two different cardiologists of various uh, subdisciplines, and one of them said, "I don't think you're going to be able to keep running with just medical treatment. Why don't you just have the electrophysiologic ablation now? Because you know I see runners, and you know you're going to want to keep running, and probably the condition will escape the medication." So even though I was confined then for several weeks, just trying to recover from this, it occurred to me, maybe the best I'll be able to do is to walk again. But I was still grateful that the medication was working. And even though I didn't know I was going to be able to run again, uh, I was still grateful that I could be doing this stuff. And so I started with baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy knows. I mean, like, I went a quarter of a mile and it didn't do it. And just started back up slowly. And so I hope I'm here at 85. I hope I'm still causing trouble to people and out there.
The again, back to the word spirituality that you use. What do you think running and nature, how has it changed the way you view even defining the word spirituality from the way you might have defined that word when you were a freshman in high school?
That's a very interesting question. Well, first off, as a freshman in high school, I probably was so self-focused that I wouldn't even consider contemplating the word spirituality, let alone kind of knowing.
So if I would have thought at all about it, it was, okay, I go to church once a week. I mean, that's kind of how I might have defined spirituality, or, sixth grade or eighth grade, or maybe even freshman, is that spirituality was tied to theology, I would say, would be my more immature way of thinking of spirituality. Did you have a spiritual upbringing or a theological upbringing as a child or adolescent?
Not at all. I was baptized in one church, reared by my parents in a different faith, and went to church sporadically as a teenager. And then, like a lot of people get to college, then you start searching for something. And so I went through a number of different denominations of churches, even to a synagogue for a period of time. Just, and I think what I was searching for at the time was what this is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, the spirituality that I've found now in the second part of life, I think is a culmination maybe of something that was beginning to wake up then. I would like to mention, I talked about the how of how I wrote this, the why of maybe I wrote this. I don't think I understood it until about 6 months ago. And I read a book by a retired Catholic priest named Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R, of Cincinnati, Ohio. And his book is a small one. It's called Falling Upwards. And what he talks about is how we evolve if we are on a spiritual path completely differently in the second half of our life as compared to the first half. And I was amazed with the insight that he has, because he is saying some of the very same things in his book that I explain here, but he's doing it not from even talking about nature, not from talking about exercising or running or anything. He's talking about his experience as a Catholic priest and uh, what people accept as dogma that they shouldn't, and uh, how we should avoid imitating others. We can appreciate other people, but and some of their values that we can learn from them, but we should not imitate them, and we should get out of ego. And he just does a beautiful job.
Mhm.
And so I think as I was writing this, I was thinking deeper about what all this means to me to be out in nature and run and so forth. And then I pick up his book and I get an explanation of what I was doing without realizing I was doing it.
So we all find our paths in
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
ways.
So Richard Rohr, Falling
Yes.
Upward.
So let's open it up to some. Oh no, we don't even have time for questions. I apologize. One question. We have time for one question.
Okay. The quotes in the book, do they have special meaning to you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, for example, like all men, I'm probably not saying this the quote correctly. All men should find out what they're running from.
James Thurber.
Yes, yeah.
I love that quote. I read that quote 20 years ago. Kathy and I were at a seminar, and I read the quote, and the reason that it struck me was the content, but also James Thurber was a humorist, a cartoonist, an essayist for the New Yorker, and that such a profound quote, it's always stayed with me, and my head is full of quotes. I just love them, and because they can summarize so much,
Yeah.
Like one of my favorite quotes was from Satchel Paige, the baseball player who only went to the 8th grade, and he said so many profound things. For I should put in the aging thing. One of his quotes was, "How old would you be if you didn't know how old you was?" It's
Yeah, it's just beautiful. All the quotes. And the wilderness is the preservation of the world. Henry David Thoreau. All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking. Friedrich Nietzsche. Well, this has been wonderful, Bill. And so our guest today has been Bill Koenig, Dr. Bill Koenig. And his book is The Spirituality of Running, a beautiful book about running in nature and, meaning and purpose. And if you'd like a copy of this book, and this book would make a wonderful coffee table book, wonderful gift to anybody who's interested in running in nature. And you can buy a copy of this book at www.lulu.com. And that's Lulu Press, Lulu. And Bill, thank you so much for being our guest. Thanks for sharing your love of running and your appreciation for nature.
Thank you, sir.
If you know someone that would enjoy watching this show, it will be available on demand tomorrow at the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel, and also the Mercy Cancer Center website. I hope you'll join us again next week for our next edition of our cancer education series. Thanks, everyone.